All right, so we were working on, of course, a Brunswick GSX Pinsetter, and usually once a week I go through and I do chain checks. I check all of the chains for proper tension, make sure that they're not starting to bind up or looking pretty bad or pretty rough. And what I usually do is I always start, let me get this camera off here. I always start with the table at home, which is the up position. And the reason why I do that is because it takes the tension off of the right table chain that you see right in here. And that allows me to make sure that it's properly adjusted and all that good stuff. So what I do is with all my pen setters at home position, I'll go grab me a little broom handle or something like that. And I walk all the way down and I check just the right chain. And this one here is pretty good. And once that's done, and if you just need to look in the manual for the proper tension, but it's usually about a half inch to an inch of travel. When you poke at these chains and they're wobbly, they're flopping around, it's time obviously to do some adjustments with them. So once the right chain is done on your pen setters, I then move over to the left side, and the left table chain is a little different because right now it's holding the weight of the table while it's in home position. So what I usually do is I'll go through all my pen setters and I will put them in, I'll put them down on the stroke limiter, and that allows the tension to move from the left chain pretty much to the right chain. So as you can see, I've got slack on the chain, the pivot bearings all the way up. I'm going to turn this off just so you can hear, and then I'll come over and I'll check the left chain and see how that's wobbling and flopping around there. So that one needs to be adjusted. That's what you don't want right there. So I will be adjusting that chain, and I will show you guys how to adjust the tension for that. All right, so here is how we adjust the table chain tension. And it's really simple to do. Need a couple of 13 millimeters. I just grabbed 2 wrenches, but you can use a socket. Might speed things up just a little bit. So you have another a nut on the other side here of this bolt, and you're just going to loosen these up just enough to where it would allow this block to slide up and down. So in this case, mine are already loosened, so they don't need to be super loose. It just needs, again, to be able to travel up and down. So again, 13 millimeter for everything. You have a jam nut down here on the bottom, so you're going to loosen that jam nut up, and I usually just bring it down about halfway, and this is your adjustment here. So this, when you tighten it, it's going to raise, and then when you loosen it, it's going to lower this block right here. So in my case, I need to obviously raise the chain a little bit and add tension, and it'll start getting tension really fast usually. So you don't need to get too crazy with it. And as you can see, I'm checking the tension of the chain here, and it's getting a little tighter, and that's going to be pretty good right there. So yeah, and that's about all you need to do for adjusting the table tensions there. Again, refer to the manual if you want to go exactly to spec. And again, I kind of go by the feel or by the look. Once you do a few of them, you kind of know where they're supposed to be. So that's it for table chains. All right, so the next thing that I like to go through and check is the drive chain for proper tension and the sweep chain. So I'm looking for slop. Like here, I've got a lot of slop in the chain. Obviously that needs to be adjusted out a little bit. I also check for slop, the same slop in drive chain, which this one here is just fine. So once you've got all that checked for slop, again, you need a little bit of travel, but not that much travel. So this one's pretty loose. I also check for timing, and the way that we're doing timing, and this is also by the manual here. Pardon my camera, it's bouncing all over the place. So how we usually do this is I go when the table's at home position, the rake is down or the sweep is down. This chain here with this pivot bearing goes in between these two bolts, and that tells me that the timing's good for the cluster timing. So this one here could be adjusted back just a hair, and so we're going to go ahead and adjust that out. We're also going to go ahead and adjust this over here. We're going to adjust the tension on this chain. I'm not going to adjust the tension on the drive chain because obviously it doesn't need it. The assembly that runs both of these chains, both of these gears, is the same assembly. So we're going to adjust this one out, and it's going to also apply to the drive chain just as well. So we'll go ahead and grab the tools that we need and get that adjusted first. All right, so here's where we're going to get started here on this adjustment. So what you're going to need is a 17mm socket and a wrench, if you prefer. And these 4 bolts right here, 1, 2, and then down here, you'll see 3 and 4. You're going to loosen those up. You don't have to pull them out, just loosen them up. And when you loosen that up, it's kind of like with the table chains we saw earlier. It allows this assembly to be able to slide or be adjusted. So you're going to loosen those up just a little bit, and then you're going to come over on this side. And let me get my flashlight here. As you can see down here, kind of hard to see everything, but you got a bolt right here that allows you to make the adjustment. And as you can see, it's got a jam nut there, and you got to loosen that up, and then you're going to tighten or loosen the big bolt here with your 17mm, and that pushes the assembly tighter or loosens it up, the whole assembly. So again, a very easy adjustment to make. So we're going to do that real quick and move on to the next thing. All right, so I've got my 4 bolts on the other side loosened up, and with the sweep chain, you do have to use the wrench to get to this bolt over here on the other side. You can't quite get a socket around it because it hits the frame. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up this jam nut here just a little bit, not a whole lot, or I'm not going to say a whole lot, but and I spin it back a little bit to allow this thing to travel. And what I'm going to do is attempt to stick my socket in here. I may just use my wrench, we'll see. But again, this is how you adjust the tension. As you tighten this screw, it actually pushes against the assembly and starts to put tension on the chain. And just that little bit, with all that slop you saw, just that little bit has put the chain exactly where I need it. So it doesn't take a whole lot to adjust these. So don't start cranking down on this thinking you need to adjust a whole bunch of slop out, because it's definitely, it doesn't take much. So this is now adjusted. I'm going to tighten this back up, and then I'm going to go through and tighten these 4 bolts up over here. And that's it. It took about 2 minutes. So let's go ahead and move this over here. Pardon all the noise. See if you can see that. Yeah. So now that that's all done, let's tighten these back. Again, you don't have to loosen them up very much. I probably went a little too far with these. You don't need to torque these things down either. They're not 100 foot-pounds of torque to keep these things within spec. So you got to remember, it is plastic that these are screwed into. So you don't want to obviously strip out your assembly, because these things are like $100 right now. So And here's the one where you're going to need the wrench to get onto, because as you can see, it kind of it's kind of hard to get a socket on it. So got to get it with kind of a weird angle here. So that should do it. All right, so since we're also doing chains, we're also going to do our timing while we're up here. And this one's sitting good. What I look for when the rake is down, obviously, is for these two to be parallel with each other. And this one's off just a little bit, not anything significant, but we're going to adjust it anyway. By the way, there's your tension. Tension's good after making the adjustments. So I'm going to show you how to adjust this, your sweep, because you may come to a point where maybe if a stroke limiter breaks or something like that, and your sweep gets stuck under the table and you're going to have to manually bring that sweep out. This is also the way that you do it too, using the motor and the belt. So we're going to adjust this just a little bit to where it's basically perfect, just for the sake of showing you how to do this. So again, this is your sweep motor, your distributor motor right here. So you don't need to do anything with it. That's your sweep motor. So I'm going to go ahead and find a place to put this here. So the way that we do this is very simple. You're going to pull back on the motor just a little bit, but you're going to place your hand on this wheel. I'm going to move to another position here. It's a little bit better. There we go. That should be good. You should be able to see that just fine. Let me get my stuff out of the way here. There we go. All right, so very simple. Again, you're going to pull back on this motor just a little bit, and this hand here is your brake now. So what you're doing is you're going to move the wheel in the direction you need, and it'll turn that the assembly and get your adjustment made that you need. So here it's going just a little bit at a time, and that's about all I needed right there. Boom, you're done. Takes a lot longer if the sweep happens to get all the way up underneath the setting table. You're going to be cranking on that thing for a while, but that's how you're going to be doing it. To adjust your table chain, the exact same way. Put your hand there on the wheel, and you're going to pull the motor back a little bit. Don't pull that motor too hard without your hand on that wheel, because it will drop that table. So just keep that in mind when you're making your adjustments for your setting for your table drive. All right, so now we're over here for the drive gear, drive chain, and like I said, it was just a little bit off from where we want it, which is in between those two bolts. Our chain that we showed earlier, and this belt is actually starting to wear out a little bit. I might just replace that just for the sake of needing to replace it. So maybe I'll do another video on that here pretty soon. So again, you want to put your hand on the wheel here and pull back on the motor just a little bit and adjust your chain the way that you need to adjust it. I'm going the wrong way. That's just about perfect there. So when you're making this adjustment, what you're doing is you're not just lining up a chain between two bolts. You are also adjusting the timing of your switch cluster. So that switch cluster is really important, because that's what tells the machine at what state it's at and what position it is and what needs to happen next. So this is your switch cluster, and everything's very dirty. I'm getting ready to do a big deep clean. I've already done a pair, so this one's next on the list. But as you can see, you've got your magnetic switches there, and then you've got your cam down here, as you can see, and that is connected directly to the shaft here that runs all the way back, as you can see there, runs all the way back to your drive, So having this thing timed right means that your switch cluster is also timed right, and that helps your machine run a lot more efficiently. All right, so the next thing that I inspect on my little chain run for the week is we are checking the 51-inch or the 51 link chain that's attached to the crank arm and pivot bearing here. This is a critical component because it's what lifts and lowers the table. So I check the chain, I check the chain gear to make sure that it doesn't have any broken teeth. Now, a broken tooth I'll let slide sometimes, but if I get two back-to-back broken teeth, I will definitely change it out. Or if I get 2 or 3 broken teeth, then it's time to change it. So that'll be another video for another time. But look at the condition of the chain. I think this one was replaced not too long ago, so it's in pretty good shape. But the other thing that I check, which is very important, is this pivot bearing. And as you can see, my hitch pin here is coming out. It's broken off right here, and the pivot bearing has actually slid out up against this pin. So if that little tiny chunk comes out, this thing pops off and we lose the table. It drops the table and probably destroys a stroke limiter, something like that. So we are going to replace this, which is very simple to do, not the pivot pin, but the hitch pin there. And the pivot bearing, or not pivot pin, the pivot bearing is actually in very good shape, and that's because we recently replaced it. Something else I look for too is I make sure that that pivot bearing that you saw there is not hitting up against the sweep arm, because that can also destroy that pin and destroy the bearing, and the next thing you know, you got a table crash and you're replacing a lot more than a little $9 bearing. So we're going to run over here and we are going to put this thing, I got all new pins, so yeah, I got a lot of work to do. So what we're going to do here is we are going to put the table into the position we need. Let's go up here to be able to work on this, because right now this is basically holding the table weight. Okay, so that's under a lot of tension. You don't want to mess with it when it's like that. So what I'm going to do is set the camera up here, and I'm going to show you the position that we want the pivot bearing to be in to make these kinds of adjustments. If I can get this thing to go out far enough, pardon all the noise here. So I'm going to aim this up about right here, and so all I want to do is put this in motor, and in motor it's either going to be table clockwise or counterclockwise. Either way, I'm going to rotate this crank arm to where the pivot bearing and crank arm straight up, and I'll show you why here. All right, so the crank arm straight up and down now, and look there, now you got all tension, or no tension. So now you can work on this thing safely, because if I would have pulled this pin while it was down where it was, probably would have ripped my finger off or something, because the table would have dropped. So now we're in a safe condition. The table is now sitting on the stroke limiter down here. Okay, sitting on the stroke limiter. I'll show you where the stroke limiter is real quick. It's on the other side of the machine. The table is now resting right here on the stroke limiter. As you can see, that little T-stop right there is resting on the stroke limiter. So the table weight is now being supported by the frame so that we can work on what we need to work on back here. So what I want to do is I'm going to replace this pin. Should be pretty simple since they're all sitting right here. There better be one. All right. And I'm going to grab my little pair of pliers. And another disaster averted, basically, is what we've come up with here. So as you can see there, we're sitting where we're supposed to now. Pivot bearings in good shape. Something else that I check for on these pivot bearings, and we'll test it here in just a minute, is to make sure that the pivot bearing itself, this outer ring, this steel ring here, doesn't have any splits or indentions in it, because that is a sign that it's starting to break down. And once this ring pops, where this chain is, where the master link is in here, that ring is all that's keeping that thing from just pulling out of that plastic right there, and that's how you get a table drop. So when you're doing your chain checks, you need to check these pivot bearings to make sure that you're not about to lose one. Okay, so again, no splits. Got a couple little dings here and there, but that's okay. That's just where the chain is folded over. But no splits and no indentions. And what I mean by indentions is you'll find one eventually, and it'll have a sunken in indention in the steel ring, and that's a sign that it's starting to stress and pull apart. So once that happens, you end up with something that's going to cost a little bit more than the $9 or $10 you have for this pivot bearing. So stroke limiters right now, or the shocks, are running about just a little over $100 on average. So again, that's part of the preventative maintenance part. So we'll do pivot bearings and chains on another video, but essentially this is what I check for. You have a pivot bearing on the other side also on the drive wheel. It doesn't hold nearly as much weight as this thing does, so you don't see those things fail as often. But again, this is how we do our chain checks. Pretty simple stuff. Again, I'm testing this one now, and that's all right. That's within spec. I might adjust just a little bit out of it. So again, pretty simple. I have 26 pin setters, and when I do just chain checks and timing checks together, it usually takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and that's to thoroughly go through and make a list of what lanes need to be adjusted. And it takes longer getting all these stinking guards back on. That's probably what takes most of the time, because that's a lot of work, man. So hopefully this video helped a little bit, and I'm going to get to putting all these new pins in, 626 of them, and rotating everything out. So have a good day, and we'll move on to the next thing.